Was this information provided to the planning board prior to this meeting?
Not to the planning board, no. We have just, Mr. Bowden did testify before the planning board, but he did not testify as an expert. So he is offering his testimony as an expert tonight.
And Mr. President, that's very much part of my concern. I haven't spoken to you in the rest of yet, but this proposed expert has already revealed himself as a partisan. And one of the core values.
Please, can we keep it down? So everyone can talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. One of the core values of an expert witness is objectivity. When an expert comes before you, one of the basic pieces of information you want to know is, can this person who's purporting to be an expert provide objective and fair analysis to you? So in the first instance, as Mr. Harsh has just revealed, this purported expert is a partisan, not an objective expert. Secondly, the opportunity to lay the foundation for expert testimony was before the planning board. That ship has sailed. The information that you are now being asked to rely on and review whether or not it's really expert information or not was never presented to the planning board. Now, for whatever reasons they may have, this purported expert chose to testify as a partisan. So you are now being asked to accept the testimony of a partisan witness in these proceedings, already testified in these proceedings before the planning board as a partisan witness, not an expert. So, for those two reasons alone, before I even have an opportunity to review the CV, which I asked you to give me the opportunity to do, an avowed partisan in these proceedings, the failure to present any expert testimony to the planning board, and instead ambush you here tonight. For those reasons alone, you should protect the integrity and objectivity of these proceedings and refuse to certify this witness and accept this witness as an expert.
I have just one question, and please refresh my memory.
If I may.
Just one question. When was Ms. Sweet brought into this process? I may be mistaken, but when was she brought into this whole process?
Before the planning board.
Before the planning board?
Complete record before the planning board, submitted her expert report.
Yeah, tonight's the first time that I've heard of her name and of this report. I know it's a pre-submitted report, but it's in fact packaged differently. Am I not mistaken?
You are mistaken.
Well, I think I'm not mistaken.
The entire planning board record was made a part of these proceedings at its very beginning. Ms. Sweet's entire report that she testified to in so many facets this evening was a part of the planning board record as a part of your record. It's been available since submitted to the planning board. It was subject to the scrutiny of the planning board. It was subject to the questioning of the planning board. It was subject to questioning by Mr. Harsh, and it's been available for public review for 3 weeks since submission to that hearing, and is now in evidence before you tonight, correctly admitted to the planning board and correctly admitted to evidence before this council.
Mr. Morado, I'm not making Mr. Conley's point for him or not, but I did attend the planning board meeting. Ms. Sweet did testify as an expert witness. The planning board did accept her testimony as an expert witness. There was a copy of that report. I got a copy of that report that night upon request of the planning board.
I'm just asking a question. It's a sincere question.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm just saying, I was there and that's what happened.
Well, what you saw happening, Counselor, was the fact that they presented all that information at the 11th hour.
Mr. Parsh, it was a notice planning board meeting in which they were reviewing a referral from this council. It was noticed according with the statute. So to say that it was at 11th hour, it was noticed for that meeting. That's the time to present expert testimony regarding what is being presented. You know the procedure. That's the procedure that's stated out in state law. Whether your client had experts at that point is another story. I'm not going to get into that. But to suggest that somehow this was the 11th hour, that was the point where they had to present the testimony. That was the point where this council referred it to the planning board for their review. And that's the point where the recommendation came from. And the applicant correctly presented their expert testimony. Now let me get to Mr. Conley's point for a second. Mr. Conley, I understand you say this is a partisan witness. You may be absolutely right, but that goes to the weight of her testimony, not to whether or not she's an expert or not. In other words, this board can certainly take that into consideration in your comments as to whether he or she is a partisan or not. I think that goes to the weight, not to the quality of the expert, so they can weigh that. So I'm not concerned about that. But I am concerned at this point regarding how it's appropriate for this body to now hear testimony on a zone change that was not heard before the planning board at the time of the hearing. Where you needed to present your testimony so that the planning board could make their recommendation. The planning board has already made their recommendation. It's fair to say that your clients did not present any expert testimony at that hearing in which the planning board could have taken consideration in making their rulings or making their findings.
That's not entirely correct.
Well, what part of it is correct?
At the planning board hearing, we presented testimony from immediate abutters. And the courts normally accept the testimony of abutters as expert.
Okay.
So,
But what about this expert? Was this expert presented before the planning board?
Not as an expert.
Okay.
But one of the...
Was he in a butter? Was he in a butter?
No.
Okay. So I'm sorry, I don't have his name. Did this expert actually testify before the planning board? Mr. Bowden? Did he testify before the planning
He
board?
commented, yes.
Well, it's either he either testified or he commented. Did he testify before the planning board on this application?
Because the testimony could only be from an abutter.
Right, so was he in a butter?
He was not an abutter.
All right.
You asked me, I told you.
Okay, so he's not in a butter, but he provided testimony as a concerned citizen. Comment as a concerned citizen.
That's right.
And then since that time, he's now been retained as an expert by your clients.
That's correct.
And you're here to present that expert testimony now.
My answer to you is that we have a situation where the developer chose not to present his final plan until right then. I could have hired an expert and still not have been able to do anything because I didn't have his plan. I agree with you, I had the subject of the hearing, but the subject of the hearing had to be that plan. And that plan came out at the hearing, if you remember.
When the plan came out, was published, the plan was published for weeks before the hearing, and then as a result of the hearing, the planning boards can modify the plan, and that's exactly what happens. That's the process that's followed in any planning board decision. In other words, you start with A, you hear testimony, you hear experts, you hear comments from the public, and then the planning board says, okay, we like this, we like that, we don't like this, you better change this to get a favorable recommendation. That's how the process works. There's nothing behind the scenes about that. That's exactly how it works.
May I ask you a question? If we hear this gentleman's testimony, what difference is it if we officially recognize him as an expert or not? We're going to hear his testimony.
I agree.
We're going to weigh his testimony individually and make our own decision.
Like I said, it's up to the council to decide. Right. Well, I'm not, again, this is for the council to decide. I'm here to guide you. I'm not opposed to hearing this testimony. If the council thinks it will be helpful in them making a decision, that's fine. And again, it goes to Mr. Conley's position as whether he's a partisan. I think you have to decide that. That goes to his weight of his qualities. But I will say that, again, if you want to hear it, this is a legislative act. You can hear any information. What you want to hear is making a legislative act, because that's what you're doing. You're amending the zoning code. And if you think this information will be helpful to you, by all means, please hear the testimony. You can take it as you want it. But however, I just have to comment, Mr. Harsh, to suggest that you were not able to present an expert at that planning board hearing to try to influence the planning board's opinion to this council is absolutely wrong. You had the opportunity to do so. For whatever reasons, maybe you didn't have the expert, maybe you didn't have the money, you chose not to. The council can certainly hear it now. But please don't suggest that somehow this was a not open or transparent process, because it was. It's exactly how the process is supposed to work. You present a plan to the planning board. They hear testimony from the public. They hear testimony from the experts. Based upon the applicant, then the testimony from the applicant, and the testimony from the concerned citizens, and the input of the planning board, they then change their recommendations. They say, we want A, not B. We want X, not Y. And that's exactly what came back before the planning board, in this council.
Counselor, remember that what was referred to the planning board was seeking an advisory opinion.
Yes.
It's not like reviewing a proposal to subdivide a house. This is, may I finish?
No, I'm not going to say anything. Go ahead.
No, this is a different process. The process is to give you all an advisory opinion. And one of the results of that process is the decision lies here. All that the planning board process did was provide advice.
Exactly, and you could have influenced that advice if you had presented an expert at that hearing. You chose not to. Now we're at the legislative level.
Listen, I'm representing...
Can I finish this, Harsh? Can I finish?
I am representing a citizens group.
Can I
They
finish?
do not have a bankroll like the developer, okay?
Listen,
Go ahead.
thank you, Mr. Karsh. You are now here at the legislative arena. This council, as a legislature, can hear any testimony they want to hear. They can decide whether it's good testimony, bad testimony, or not. It's not up to me to stop them if they want to hear it.
So can we just move on and hear it, please? He wants to word it. I'd rather move on with the hearing, please.
Mr. Conley, please.
I absolutely agree that this council should hear any and all testimony that is presented to it. Give everyone here a full and fair opportunity to be heard. Suggesting to you, however, that an expert is a special designation, and that an expert's testimony gets a high degree of credibility than a mere witness's testimony.
It's up to the fact finder, though, Mr.
That's right. Now, here, and as your solicitor has correctly said, give it the weight it deserves. Give it the weight that a partisan would deserve. Give it the weight that somebody who failed to testify before the planning board, your local land use expert, as an expert, deserves. Give it the weight it deserves when it's introduced in a manner to avoid the scrutiny of your planning board, to give you the advisory opinion. Give it the weight it deserves, and those credentials are measured against the credentials and report of the expert in the record. Hear the testimony, give it the weight it deserves.
Thank you, Mr. Conley. Mr. Hurst.
Now you know why Bill was my lawyer when I was the vice chairman of the Ethics Commission. He is good, there's no question. Almost as good as your town council. I would like to call Mr. Bowden, please, to come forward and discuss his credentials, if I may put everything back.